Nobody wants to. Come on, I knew somebody's coming.
You can hear me though, I'm pretty loud.
In the years that you owned the Mysterion, can you fill in any blanks for us on this history? Because it's the only car that's never been found, it's presumed that it was destroyed over the years.
Well, as most of you probably know, the Mysterion had these big holes in the frame. And it wasn't long, we were hauling these cars in a semi, even though the semi had air ride. The frame kept breaking, and we had to re-weld it after almost each event. And eventually it just became a problem for us. It wasn't worth hauling the car. Now my memory and other people's memories are different. So what I remember is we took the car apart and gave the engines back to Ed, and that was the end of the car. Darryl Starbird claims that he got the body off the car, but never did anything with it. The bodies disappeared, and so far as I know, we sort of junked the car. It just wouldn't hold together. Now there are two new Mysterions out there. One's at the Galpin Ford Museum in LA, and the other one is at a museum in Detroit. Different guys built these. The guy that runs the Ford Museum, the Galpin Museum, he built that one himself. So whatever the true story is, I don't know. If you want to know about the Outlaw, as far as I know, it's sitting at the Peterson Museum in storage. And the Beatnik Bandit, the last time I saw it, it was in the lobby of the William F. Harrah Foundation in Reno. So, and those cars have been on tour recently. In fact, we had them in Detroit a couple years ago. So that's the end of the Roth cars as I know it. There were a couple of the Roth cars that I didn't take. I didn't take the Road Agent, and I didn't take the one with the coffin on the back. So I don't know what. I know that one's still around, but he built other cars, and we just didn't take everything that he built. He became a big enough name for us as a celebrity to advertise his being at the shows. He was great with people. He was always a gentleman, and he was not. Well, he was sort of. I always call him a soft-spoken giant. So that's how I thought of Ed. That's how I'll remember him.
Thank you, Bob.
Anybody else?
Yeah, I was talking with Larry yesterday, and we were reminiscing about some old World Wheel shows. Late 70s, early 80s, I went and I seen the 1960s Batmobile, and it was flocked. I've always been curious why that car was flocked.
So he saw the Batmobile when they had the flocking on it.
Yeah.
He was wondering what was the deal and why was it flocked.
The flocking was a cheap way for George to repair it. He didn't want to mess around repainting the car, so he just flocked it. And everybody hated it. And I don't know one person who thought that looked good. George was, well, he was completely opposite from Ed, but he was one of the legends of the hot rod sport, in my opinion, and he was one of my best friends too. And he came up with a lot of good ideas, and he came up with some bad ideas. So if you know the cars that George built, some of them weren't that cool, but he was working for the TV and movie industry, and like a good example is the Batmobile. It was sitting outside when he got a call from Warner Brothers that they needed a car. I think it was in 2 weeks, and the car was sitting outside. It was a Lincoln Futura that had been used in a movie. It started with a kiss, and he built that car, if you want to call it that, in 2 weeks, and of course it became maybe the most famous car in the world. So you never know how things might turn out, I guess. But the flocking was sort of a joke for those of us who were in the business.
On that deal with Barris, funny story, you really need to go check out Bob's book, because it is so full of these little stories about different people that you'll know who they are when you read them. And just an everyday kind of occurrence thing that happened in his life is he was at Barris' shop one day in the early 70s, I guess, and he looked outside and there was two hippies looking inside of the showroom of Barris' shop. And George had a big, huge window you could see in there. There's a big showroom. And so Bob said, hey, there's a couple of hippies looking in your windows. And George says, yeah, there's always somebody looking in there. And he says, yeah, but these hippies have a new Rolls Royce. So Bob and George went up to see who it was, and it was Yoko and John Lennon. They just stopped by and wanted to see what was there, so they came in, looked around, and went on their way. And it wasn't even that big. When I was asking him, what did they say? And he goes, I just want to look around. It wasn't even a big deal, really, for them. So that was kind of a everyday occurrence, being in L.A., but those shops, when Ed was in L.A. or Maywood and George was over there in L.A. or in Burbank, that was an everyday deal, the celebrities. But anybody else? Oh, hang on.
Yeah, hanging out at George's was really something. I did that a lot. And in fact, interesting enough, one day I came in after Shirley had passed away. Shirley, George's wife, died 19 years before him. So I came in one day and I always hung out there in the afternoon because his secretary went home about 2 o'clock and I could sit there and make phone calls. And I just got bored, like the day when John Lennon showed up. I was just walking around the showroom. I actually took the picture and wrote the story that's in my book. But one day, I mean, you never knew who was going to show up. It could be John Travolta, it could be anybody. I mean, people were always showing up. So one day I go in there, and George always made me feel at home. Hey, Bob, sit down here, we're just shooting the breeze. Well, one day it was Audie Murphy. I don't know if you guys know who Audie Murphy was, but he was the most decorated soldier in the Second World War, sort of a hero of mine. And he got killed shortly after that in a private plane crash and is buried in Arlington. So you just never knew what was going to happen with George, and it was the same way with Ed. Every time I went to see Ed, it was something different. He always wanted to go someplace different, someplace I'd never been. And that was always exciting for me because I was from Detroit and I'd never been to these places.
Anybody else? Come on, guys. No? Oh, here we go.
They can come talk to us.
Well, speaking of the Western thing, tell them about the hotel and the room number you can stay in there in Durango that you were telling me about.
Durango. What's his name?
Louis L'Amour.
Huh?
Louis L'Amour.
Yeah. So if you're from Colorado, and even if you're not, in Durango, there's a great hotel. I love it. It's the Strater Hotel right downtown. It was built about 150 years ago. They have a great honky-tonk bar. They have a show in the summer that they run. It's just a real historic place. And if you want to spend an extra $100, you can stay in room 222. There's a plaque on the door. This was the room that Louis L'Amour used when he wrote his Western books. And it looks right down Main Street. It's a big room. And I only paid the $100 once. But when you go in the room, there was a book, one of Louis L'Amour's books, with a personal letter from his widow, saying thanks for staying in the room that we shared so many days in when Louis was writing his books and so forth. So it's a great piece of history, and as you may or may not know, Louis L'Amour probably wrote over 100 Western books. I mean, there's only two big Western writers like that, him and Zane Grey, that I know of. It's just a fun place to visit. And Durango is a really, really neat town, so I know a couple of people who are from there. So if you haven't been to the Strater, try it out. It's all decorated with antique furniture.
Well, I'm gonna let Bob tell one more story, and a fitting one because we're here to celebrate the life of Ed Roth and the continuation of all that he did and all the art and the cars and all. And you would tell the story about the hat story. And be sure and come by and talk to Bob, and visit, and go, look at the book, maybe pick up the book. But go ahead and tell that, and we'll end that with this story.
Well, I thought of bringing the hat, but I didn't. Simply because I don't have a case for it.
I told Bob I would make him a case, that way he can put the hat next time.
So it was, and Eileen can relate to this because she was there. But the last year that Ed had another new car, he always seemed to come up with another car, and he was doing the show circuit. And early on in the season, I didn't go to all the shows, of course, ever, but that would have been impossible because there was a weekend when we had 7 shows on the same weekend. But anyway, I went up to Ed on this last season, didn't know it'd be his last season, and I said, Ed, I want to get something of yours that's meaningful, something that I can keep that, I got t-shirts, I got sweatshirts, I don't need that kind of stuff. I said, what can I have of yours that might be meaningful to me? And he said, Rob, he said, I go to Japan, I can sell my underwear, I can sell my socks. I said, well, I sure as heck don't want your underwear and your socks. He said, well, what do you want? I said, I don't know. So I was looking right at him, and I said, I want your hat. And he said, oh, I'd never sell my hat. He said, it's just part of me, and he said, it's not for sale. So we went through the whole show season. I would always go talk to him, and he would always tell me the hat wasn't for sale. And we got to the last show, Milwaukee, and this was in 2001, and I went over and said hi to him and Eileen, and Ed said, hey, maybe she remembers it differently than I do, but he said, hey, you still want my hat? And I said, yeah, but you said it's never for sale. He said, $1,000 the end of the show and it's yours. I said, you got a deal. So we finished the show, and I was waiting for Ed. I had a silver pen. I wanted him to sign the top of the hat. As you probably know, it sort of felt right. And I finally decided I'd walk to his booth, so I walked out of the office. I had the $1,000. I gave him the money. Here he came walking with a box. He was carrying a box. And I gave him the money, and I said, I want you to sign the hat. And he said, well, look inside the box. And I said, yeah, there's a hat in there. And he said, no, look in the waistband. And there was a note that he had written to me, which is a picture of a note in the book. And it was really special. So I just, I tell everybody, no, the hat's not for sale. And my kids have agreed that probably the hat will end up at the Speedway Museum in Lincoln, Nebraska. They've got an outlaw there, and they're going to build a display to Ed. And I think in the end, probably the hat will go there. But I'd like to bring it here. If I come back next year, I'll see that I've got a case, and I'll bring it so you can see it. But so far as I know, it's the last hat that he had. I'm not positive on that, but I know that on the picture that was on his funeral, he was wearing the hat. So, sort of something really special, and showed me how special our relationship was. So he was always a great guy to me, and I'll always remember him that way. Thank you so much for your time, and pleasure talking to you.
Well, thanks, guys. And Friday we're going to do this again. I guess Friday's tomorrow. We're going to do this. We're going to do this again, but we'll dig down into some of the specs and some of the cars a little bit more, the show cars. But thanks again, and here's Cody.